Hello everyone, if you'd like to see how to make a lining for an unlined coat, being the Jill Coatigan by Seamworks, stay tuned. Hello everyone, I'm Deb and this is DB Designs and Sewing Australia. Welcome to all my subscribers and welcome to anyone who is new. Now, when I made the Jill Coatigan the other day in the Espresso Feline Ponte, I did say I was going to make another one and that I was going to line it, even though it's an unlined coat. So you've got to create the pattern pieces for the lining. And a couple of subscribers asked, could I show them how to do that? So this is the fabric I had to make it in. I've had it in my stash for a few years. It's a wool cashmere and it's from super cheap and it seems to attract fluff. So this is the right side, and by the right side I mean the outside, and this is the wrong side. It's not quite as soft on the wrong side. So I had that in my stash, and I also had this satin in my stash as well. So goes really well together. And then when I was making it, I thought, this has got a whole dressing gown vibe going on for me. And I really can't stand it when things I make remind me of a dressing gown. And once I get that in my head, that's it. It's a dressing gown. So I've decided to make a Jill Coatigan lined dressing gown. And this is where I'm up to so far. It is still madly attracting fluff and dust, but I put some piping on it. I made my own piping using piping cord. So this is the width piping cord I use. So it's quite a chunky one. I have got a narrower one. And I do believe this is, I think it's like Birch. It's a well-known brand of piping cord. And I think I did buy it off eBay. Did buy it off eBay because it was too expensive anywhere else. But anyway, I originally had the pockets on it when it was going to be a coat, but I have since taken them off thinking I'm not sure what type of pocket I'm going to put on it. Maybe I need to incorporate some piping into the pocket, but I can do that last and sew that on just before I finish the lining. Because it's a dressing gown, so you really do need to have pockets on it. So this is the piping, goes all the way down, and I have finished the piping 10 centimeters before the end of the raw edge hem. Now the reason for that is it's chunky, it's thick, because it's cashmere, and I'm guessing any type of like thick wool, I thought I'm not going to be able to do the hem really neatly. I decided that I would finish the piping before the hem, so I didn't have to worry about it when I was doing the hemming. Same on the other side. Really happy with how it's come out. It is a bit of a process to press. So when you're pressing wool, then I'm using a pressing cloth, then I'm using a clapper, and then you've got to let it cool. So that really goes for all ironing. If you've ironed a whole lot of shirts and they're still warm, don't just stick them in your wardrobe. Wait until they get cold, because the pressing will be better if you've let it go cold. Because if you put it in the wardrobe, that sleeve might get tucked around there, and then you'll have a crease in it because it's set because it was warm. So the only thing I usually press creases into are tea towels, because I iron them on both sides of them. And there's a reason for that. If you have tea towels in your kitchen, something happens to someone, or a really bad cut, or something you need to get a compression bandage on, anything like that, or something to press on it, get a clean tea towel out. If the tea towel is ironed, it's much more sterile than anything else you will have probably on hand. So I always iron the inside and the outside of my tea towels, and I iron creases into them. But that's just me. My children think I'm crazy. They don't iron anything. Okay, so once I decided I was going to have it as a dressing gown, took the pockets off, made the piping, and I've also put in some belt loops. As you can see, there's just bits of fluff stuck all over this. Is it going to drive me crazy? Probably. More thread all over it. So, this is what we've got, and I haven't put the sleeves in it yet. So this is my mannequin. Now, I did already cut this on the fold before I decided that it was going to be a dressing gown. So I cut the back on the fold because I didn't want the vent in it. I certainly didn't need the vent in it because I'd made the other Ponte one. I knew this is a size small and it's still quite big. So, it's supposed to be a coat, so it's supposed to be able to go over other items. So when we're looking at what parts need to be lined, we can see the back needs to be lined. This is the back pattern piece, and you could trace it off just as is, and I'm sure it would be fine. But one of the rules with linings is they should never be smaller than the outer. One, they're going to pull, and two, if the outer's fitted, it's either going to squeeze you or it's going to tear. If you've ever had a lining that's given way on the side seam on a coat because you pull the coat over yourself all the time, or you pull it over and button it or tie it, it could be that the lining was originally slightly smaller than the outer, or the outer was a stretching fabric and the lining isn't. So there can be a couple of reasons, but you always want your lining to be bigger than your outer without being too baggy. So with this, I place this on the fold. I place this pattern piece on the fold of the lining fabric, and then I moved it 1.5 centimeters away from the fold. So what I've got by doing that is I have got extra fabric right here. So I can do a few different types of pleats, but usually on a lining, I would just do a fold over pleat like that at the top and sometimes at the bottom. So what I did do was I did mark the center back at the bottom, so I know what the center is, where the center is. I will wait until I'm going to bag out that, sorry, I kicked the camera. I will wait until I'm going to bag out that lining to see if I need to put a pleat in it, or if I could just do a stay stitch around that bottom edge, which would bring it together a tiny bit, because overall it's not a huge amount that it's going to need to bring itself in by. But if I find that it's too much fabric, I will just do same as the pleat that I did for the top, I would also do at the bottom. So I will just do, I'm going to do any sort of fancy box pleat or invert. I don't do an inverted pleat generally because you have to stitch down too far. I actually like the pleat just to be stitched across where the stitch line's going to be, because some of the time it's up here on your back and your shoulders that you need that extra room in the lining. What we're trying to do is stop the lining from tearing. So that's the back. So you're just using the back piece. And these are the sleeves, because I haven't sewn the sleeves in yet. So I've got the sleeves cut out and the lining cut out identical to the pattern piece. So the line is exactly the same for the pattern piece. Because I've already got this coat, I know that those sleeves are really quite roomy, so the lining is not going to tear from there. So we'll have the sleeve piece, we've got the back. So now we need to do this other front section, but remembering how far over this facing comes. We don't want the whole piece to be all of that. So there is a way to decide which piece of this we will use. So this is the front. And we have to remember what goes on the front, which was the facing. And here is the facing pattern piece. And as it should, it fits perfectly over itself. Just holding the pattern piece down. And I'm going to draw a line. Just using this facing. Because it's not a new facing piece we need, it's a front piece that we need. So we need to know where the facing is going to come to. Okay, so this is the piece that we need, this piece, because that's how wide the facing comes out onto there. But we also need to add seam allowances to that. And I don't really like a very shallow lining attachment. I'd rather have more to play with than less to play with. So when you're thinking about your facing's going to come right to here. All right, that'll be its raw edge will be there. So if that's your raw edge coming to here, we're going to need this piece to be 1.5 centimeters plus another 1.5 centimeters for its fold over section. And it's 1.5 centimeters, which is a seam allowance. We will need to make this 3 centimeters from what would be this raw edge, so we can get a really nice fold over when we bag out our lining. So how we'll do that, so we know we need to come 3 centimeters out from here. Now you could do it more if you want to, because at the end of the day you can trim it off. But it's much harder to add it back on. But we're going to do 3 centimeters so that we've got a decent seam allowance. So we're just going to mark 3 centimeters. So once you've got your 3 centimeter markings, you can just join that up. Now, some of the time I use quilting rulers, some of the time I use pattern making rulers. It just depends what I'm doing. So this is a ruler with a curve in it. This is a Lutterlow system ruler. I have no idea where I got it from. Somebody probably gave it to me, because I don't have the Lutterlow system, but I do believe that it's quite good. So there we've got our new marking. So what we're going to do then is put a piece of tissue paper, pattern making paper, unwaxed lunch wrap, whatever you want to use. Get back there. And with your paper scissors only, we are going to create this pattern piece from the red line to the outside edges. So let's go with that. Okay, and there we have our new lining piece, front lining. Let's cut it out and see how it looks against the part of the coat that I've already got made up. Now the thing with linings is never make them smaller than the outer shell. It's just unless it's a built-in corset or something that you're going for, which is technically not a lining and is often not attached, if at all, in very many places on the outer garment. Okay, let's check out how this fits. So once you've got your pattern piece done, you can lay it on here and see how it's going to fit. We can see that that fits perfectly, meets up with the side. There's the marking for the sleeve. There's the other marking on that piece for the sleeve, even though they're technically not going to join to each other. So let's see how much if only she could find her pins, how much turnover we've got. So that's what we're really interested in, is how are we going to join, you know, how are we going to bag out the lining onto the main body of the coat or dressing gown. So when we look at it here, this is pinned to the body of the coat, so it's because we want to see how much, this is how much seam allowance, let's call it, or overlap we've got. Remember, this is going to be a raw edge. This is going to be a raw edge of a lining. Actually, it's not too bad a fraying lining, but some are. And this is going to be what it's going to join to, which is the actual coat facing. So if we turned under 1.5 centimetres, so if we're going to turn over 1.5 centimetres, there's going to be our lining just there. So we're not really turning it under, not unless you're going to hand sew the whole thing down, but you can easily bag that out. So when it comes to the lining, we would be putting right sides together. So this will be right sides of the lining. This would be right side of the lining to right side of the Coatigan / dressing gown. Let's just pin that there. At about 1.5 centimetres. Now this is also pinned it all the way through to the front, probably through into the mannequin as well, but that's okay. It's just for a demonstration. We want to see then so if we stitch that lining to the facing and then it gets turned out, then it would be bagged out and it would be like that. Your perfect lining. And that's going to look good when it's bagged out and it's sewn on the sewing machine. So what you need to remember to do when you've got something that doesn't come with a lining, which means it doesn't have lining pattern pieces. If this pattern came with a lining, I'm sure the only pattern piece that would be called the lining pattern piece would be this piece, this front piece that I created. The rest of it would be your back. Technically it's not on a fold, but if it was, cut one on the fold, main fabric, cut one on the fold, lining fabric. Same with your sleeves. Cut two main fabric, cut two lining fabric. This would be the only extra pattern piece that you've got. So that's how linings are created. So this is what we're looking at. This is the front piece. And this is a front facing piece. So your facing has to be in the same fabric unless you were using a contrast wool or some other sort of heavier fabric, because it forms a lapel. So in the case of a coat, which is often something you might want to line that does not come with a lining, what you need to concentrate on is what piece is missing. So you can see this is where I drew down the edge of where that facing, which is this piece, met my other front, and then I added on 3 centimetres all the way down and made a pattern piece from that. And that should work out perfectly at a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. The main thing is, do not make your lining too small. You will tear it. If you've ever had linings that give way in the side seams, probably because they're too tight. I tend to make mine looser, and I'm not a person that's got a big bottom. Some coats, even expensive coats, come with a lining that has no extra in it. I have relined coats. I had a navy blue double-breasted quite long woolen coat, and I think I had it for like 7 years, and I had put a new lining into that because after 3 years the lining just fell to bits, and it fell to bits in the side seam. I did wear it when I was pregnant, and it did button up when I was pregnant, but if it buttoned up, it should have been big enough in the lining. So when I made a new lining for it, I made sure I put the pleat in the back of the neck, because what that small pleat in the back of the neck, I'll show you on the inside, might be easier to see. What that small pleat does in the back of the neck, it gives you that extra amount of room. She says looking for a tape measure, which is, it's 1.5 on the fold. So it's 3 centimetres extra ease in the whole body of the coat. This is quite a loose coat, but when you're talking about how do I line something that doesn't come with lining pieces, this is what you've got to think about. How much bigger do I need to make the lining? So I will keep on going with this dressing gown. And I can say that because I've only got one winter dressing gown and an hoodie, but this would be really, really warm. Once it's got that lining in it, and this lining is satin, and I generally like to go for, in all of my coats, quite a heavy type of lining, because I think that Bem silk, which I probably have got some of, this is what I call Bem silk, what it's really called. It's really called, oh, Bem silk lining. Okay, it's quite lightweight, fly away, and you can tell by the sound of it. Yeah, it's quite thin. Whereas when I look at other things like just a plain satin, how cool is this fabric? We can already see. Now I have got black fur, even though I said I wasn't making any more coats, to make another winter coat. But you can see that this satin, although it's not really, really shiny, it is already heavier than the Bem silk lining. And this is dance time satin. And you can see how much thicker this is. Now this isn't washed yet. And I've also got it in a yellow. So I've got black fur and I've got a choice of, well, a yellow lining, a red lining, this really groovy lining, and the Bem silk I wouldn't bother to put into the fur coat. This in my, what I call my teddy bear coat, which is like the beigey coloured one. It's got a gold, very heavy satin lining, and it's part of what makes that coat really, really warm, because I have got the blue one, that blue fur, but that's lined with a Bem silk lining and it just isn't anywhere near as warm. So I'm figuring that this will be really, really warm, and I don't want it to be really, really long, and I will need to check the sleeves before I finish all that off, because I don't want them to be too long, because, you know, you do dishes and all that sort of stuff when you have got your dressing gown on. So, and I will need to make a belt. And I did try to make belt loops out of the wool. I don't know what I was thinking, because yes, I like triple folded them, so to speak. Actually, ×4 folded them. So folded 2 pieces into the center, then folded it together, stitched it down. It's stitched down all right. My sewing machine's actually quite liking the thickness of this fabric and doesn't try and chew it up. But when I get over to lumpy bits, I am using a hump jumper on it just so that my stitches stay really good. And I did try sewing in to the side seams a piece of that belt looping. Well, I only did that on one side. Just ridiculous. It was gigantic and really so fat you couldn't do it. So that's why I went for, and I thought I'll just use a piece of the lining, which I did here, and they're decent old belt loops, not little tiny pieces of string. Remember this, I'm going to make a belt out of this fabric. So really quite happy with the belt loops. This is what it looks like on the inside. So you can see where I stitched it to it first and then enclosed it in the side seams and went back and forth twice in the side seam so that it doesn't pull out. Now, sometimes in the summer dressing gowns that I make, and I make the Tazudi robe in the summer dressing gowns, I always put a hook in there for hanging it up. But I'm not going to do that with this one. I think it's too much stress on the neck of it. I mean, I could put it in there. Oh, it's all going to be so thick. And if I chose to make a hanging loop with the lining, I think it'd just tear straight out. It would tear straight out of it after a while. So I have hooks that are not pointy hooks, but big round hooks. So I think it's going to hook on there okay. And if not, I'll just hang a wooden coat hanger on there and then put it on the coat hanger. Yeah, it's not something that you would be prepared just to throw in the washing machine. So it's sort of like a good dressing gown. I actually think it's going to look quite nice as a dressing gown. So I'll have the belt, which I made the belt loops at my waist. So I tried this on to make sure the belt loops are at my waist, because it's something that I have an issue with, is that the belt loops are never on my waist. They're actually sometimes on my lower hip. So I wanted to make sure it was in the right spot. So that's how you make the pattern piece for the lining pattern piece that is missing. So this is where we're at now. It's looking particularly like a coat. And so I've put the sleeves in. I've tried it on. I've tacked up the sleeve length that I want, because I don't want it too long, because I often do dishes when I've got a dressing gown on. So now I'll show you the lining. Okay, I have put the lining in. Well, almost completely in. I've left it open to here. That's the bottom hem. And I've left the side seam open on the lining so that I can pull it back through. Pretty happy with how that went. And as you can see, this is a construction of the lining. And remembering, this piece is the only piece that we had to make. All the rest is the actual pattern pieces that came with the jacket. And there's a pleat in the back, so that the lining has a little bit more give in it than the outer shell fabric. So now I was just going to finish it off, and then I remembered I need to put some sort of pockets on it, which would be ideal to do before I closed up that bottom, because it's going to be easier to get to. So pretty happy with it so far, and I will show you when I have decided and put on the pockets. So now I'm back and I've finished the dressing gown, and I was making a belt. Not that you can see, but I was making a belt, but it was so very thick that I could not make a belt that was double-sided with the wool cashmere. So I ended up making one that had the lining fabric on the other side, so it wasn't so thick, because it was so thick. Couldn't do it. And the pockets, I've just put a bit of the lining trim and just made actual square pockets. Everything else is completed. When you're thinking about how are you going to line something that doesn't have the lining pieces, what we're looking for is what pattern pieces are missing for the lining. We already had the back pattern piece, which I did add a pleat into. So you can see the pleat up there, just to give it a bit more room. Remember, never make the lining smaller than your outer fabric. That's how you tear the lining. We also had the sleeve pieces. I didn't need to do a pleat in the bottom of the coat to allow for this pleat up the top. So when I'm looking at the bottom section of the coat, the lining is a tiny bit looser than the outer, but I just took up that extra fabric by making sure my lining was against the feed dogs when I bagged this out. So it just gave a tiny bit of ease. You know, if you sew two pieces of fabric together and you don't have a walking foot on, your under fabric is going to feed slightly faster than your upper fabric. So sometimes that's really, really useful for adding ease to things. And I will often sew sleeves in with the sleeve side against the feed dog because the sleeves may have some ease in them and it's easier to take it up. So that's all I did, and this bagged out perfectly. Really happy with the dressing gown, really happy with the lining, and it should be really warm. We looked at our facing piece, which was here. We'll call that the facing of the collar. Is that what they'll call it? Front facing, yes. So we're looking at the facing overlaid on the front section. You can see where I drew that black line down there. And then I wanted my seam allowance to bag out to be 1.5 centimetres. So I drew another line, which is the red line, 3 centimetres away. One of the things you need to think about is how tight is my outer garment, because you may need to make your lining slightly bigger. And whether that means you might have a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance, and on your lining you're only going to do a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and then do a 1 centimetre seam allowance on your sleeves as well, so that your sleeve fits into the armhole of the lining, so that your lining sleeve and your actual lining body fit into each other properly. So that's basically how you can make pattern pieces. You do not need to be a pattern maker. Now, with all these pattern pieces, we can see that, even though this is drawn all over, that this is a straight grain line. I still use that same straight grain line for the lining piece that I created. All your pattern pieces that you're creating it from should have the straight grain line on it. Just continue to use that straight grain line. But basically, easy to make the pattern piece, and just try it. And so when you've got the body of your coat, dressing gown, made up, try that new pattern piece. See where it's going to come to. And with this, the pattern piece was only this section here. So I knew that as long as it covered the inside of the facing and it went to the side seams, that it was going to fit. What you need to decide is what pattern pieces are missing and what pattern pieces do I need to create, and you're using your existing pattern pieces to create the new pattern pieces. And if you want to give yourself way more than 3 centimetres seam allowance, give yourself way more than 3 centimetres seam allowance. It's easier to cut things off, because once you start to pin it in to bag it out, you'll be able to see if it's way too big and got too much in it. And remember, that was the Jill Coatigan by Seamwork. I did know how to make it up because I had previously made the unlined one. And I had decided that this was a coat until I got the fabric out and I actually cut it out. And I thought, this is just screaming dressing gown. So, and once I get that stuff in my head, and I think it's a whole shawl collar thing, that makes me think dressing gown. Very happy with this, very happy with this for a good dressing gown. If you need any further information, please contact me. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you get to line something and create a lining for yourself. This was a fairly easy and straightforward one. Remembering if you're doing blazers that are unlined, they might have pockets on the outside. You don't need to account for those pockets on the inside, but they will also have a facing piece, just like this has got, which means that you can overlay that on your front section. So you will have your whole front, then you will have your facing piece that is made in the same fabric generally, unless it's a contrast fabric, but it'll be made in usually the same substrate as the outer fabric. And so all you're doing is creating the strip that goes down the side there. It can be easy to create a lining for a blazer also. With a blazer, sometimes they might have a more fitted sleeve. So I would, once you've got your outer body made up, you can try it on. In this coat, it was a loose fitting oversized coat, but if you've got something that is much more fitted, check the fit of your outer once you've made that up before you create your extra lining piece that you may need, because you might need a little bit more room in it just so that it does not tear. So really happy with this dressing gown. Please like and subscribe and let me know if you need any further information on creating any extra lining pieces you might have. Now, you might have something that's completely different than a coat. By all means, ask and I'll see what I can do for you. Anyway, everybody have a wonderful week. I will talk to you all soon. Bye.